My place in Canadian history starts in Ireland in 1831 with my great-great-great-great-grandparents, John Denison and Catherine Denison. They did not have great lives at the time. They were not treated right in the farming workforce and did not make a lot of money for their work. There was also a potato famine on the rise, which was frightening as potatoes were a big part of their diet. Though they had heard of other places in the New World, such as Canada, the United States, and Australia, these countries had offered opportunity to own land and better the lives of their children. They thought of how great it would be to live in these countries, but also the potential dangers of a long boat trip at sea. Though the new manufacturing and land opportunity piqued their interest, ultimately they decided to go on a ship called the HMS Able, a ship sailing towards Canada. It was a long voyage on the HMS Able. There was not a lot to do on the ship besides eat what little food there was, sleep, and wait to hit land. They had encountered extreme weathers at sea, making the trip more frightening. As the voyage had continued, the food supplies had diminished, and many became malnourished. There had also been an outbreak of disease on board that, combined with the malnutrition, had left many sick and some dead. After 6 weeks, they docked on an island up the St. Lawrence River from Montreal called Isle de Grace. This island was an Irish quarantine for all those who were sick and for everyone who was on board to be taken care of. My great-great-great-great-grandparents were soon cleared after and went to Montreal, where they could finally start their new lives in Canada. Once they had came to Montreal, they headed to the land they were promised. Their land was just north of York in Caledon, Ontario. The property was fairly large, being 100 acres, enough to grow what they needed to support themselves and make a little extra money. Though because of the size of the fields, it was hard for them to farm it all before the end of harvest season. Whenever they had enough money to do so, they would hire someone to help them farm quicker, hoping to get more out of what they had put in. Outside of farming, it was hard for Irish people to get jobs as there was discrimination towards them at the time. Some businesses had signs for applicants outside their door that said "No Irish need apply," meaning they would not hire any Irish. Because of this, my family had to stay in farming. In the August of 1844, my great-great-great-grandfather William Denison was born. Later, in 1873, he married my great-great-great-grandmother, Martha Ingram. My family farmed for the generation until my great-great-grandfather, Joseph Edward Denison, decided to work in the railway. A few years later, in the 1910s, Joseph settled down in Weston, Ontario, and married my great-great-grandmother, Mabel Collins, who would be the mother of my great-grandfather, Louis Clare Denison. Joseph had found a job working for a CCM factory where he was a first-class boiler tech and plant manager. The factory had been the bicycle and motor part of the CCM company, different from the now popular hockey brand. They made and maintained bicycles as well as worked on motor vehicles which were unpopular at the time. My great-grandfather, Louis, had also worked at the CCM factory in his teens. Just before the 1930s began, the Great Depression had come and was harsh times for many Canadians. Fortunately, because of the job Joseph had already secured, he could provide for the family in the tough times. My family was lucky and had gotten through the Great Depression fairly well off. In 1939, my great-grandfather Louis married my great-grandmother, Evelyn Nightingale, right at the end of the Depression. It was the beginning of World War II. My great-grandparents had been living in Weston, where they had been involved in helping with the war. My great-grandfather Louis, who had not fought in the war because of health reasons, built planes for the Canadian Army. Though a different man in my family had fought in the war. His name is Reg Turcott, and he would later marry my great-grandmother after Louis had passed away. Reg had fought in Italy, North Africa, Holland, and England. He even fought in the invasion of Normandy, also known as D-Day. For his efforts in the war, he earned medals for service in the infantry and medals for fighting in Italy, Holland, and North Africa. Back in Canada, on April 20th, 1940, my grandfather, Robert Edward Dennison, was born in Weston, Ontario. In 1957, Robert Dennison and Doreen Bowden, my father's parents, met in their grade 11 class. They were later married in 1961 and had 3 children, Beth, Sharon, and the youngest being my father, Jonathan Edward Dennison, born on May 27, 1969. My mother's parents were from Jamaica and had wanted to move to Canada for a better life. My grandfather, Charles Vernon Hewlett, first came over in 1965, where he worked on the railroads to afford a better education. My grandmother, Avis Pamela Uberta Watson Stevens, came over in 1967, and they got married that year. They also had 3 children, Maxine Lorraine, and the oldest being my mother, Charmaine Elaine Hewlett, born on April 22, 1970. Both of my grandparents had decided to move to Brampton, Ontario in the 70s, as it was an up-and-coming town at the time. Also, both avid church enthusiasts, they had gone to Bramalea Baptist Church, where there is now a cross dedicated to my grandfather Charles. My grandparents and parents both met there. My parents dated throughout high school and got married in 1991. On July 19, 1997, my older sister Ashley Mariah Dennison was born, and on March 9, 1999, I, Maxwell Edward Dennison, was born, both of us in Mississauga. Shortly after I was born, we moved to Brampton to be closer with family. In 2009, we moved to Stouffville, and we have been there ever since. I attend Bill Crothers Secondary School, where I'm active in many different athletic clubs. A goal I have is to earn an athletic scholarship to a university, which would be a first from my family. The only reason that I have this opportunity, though, is because of my family's courage to move to Canada. If they were never brave enough to try and obtain a better life, I would be in Ireland or Jamaica, probably never introduced to my sports. I am so thankful to my family for making those sacrifices that led to me being able to do the things I love.